True war encounters. Full story. The rifle arrived at Firebase Delta with no ceremony, just a Ruger precision bolt action in .308 Winchester, matte black, unremarkable except for 2 words chalked on the synthetic stock in faint white paint. Still point. The supply sergeant looked at the paperwork, then at the lean Marine corporal standing in the equipment tent, a single white feather tucked into the band of his boonie hat. "This what you requested?" the sergeant asked, skepticism plain in his voice. "Seems heavy for jungle work. White feather, everyone called him that now, the name sticking after his second week in country." Ran his hand along the barrel. Cold, precise, balanced, like a theorem. He'd grown up in Montana hunting mule deer at 600 yards, learned to read wind in sage and snow. The Corps taught him to use the M40, and he respected it. But the M40 was a tool built for a different kind of work. This Ruger was built for competitions, for shooters who measured success in fractions of an inch at known distances. It wasn't supposed to belong in a combat zone. "It'll do," White Feather said quietly. The other snipers thought he was crazy, too heavy, too slow, built for flat ranges and paper targets, not triple canopy jungle and moving threats. One of them, a sergeant named Keller, watched White Feather zero the rifle on the makeshift 100-meter range and shook his head. "You planning to carry that beast through the bush?" Keller asked. "Thing weighs 12 pounds empty." 13, White Feather corrected, adjusting the scope. "With the bipod." "Exactly my point." White Feather fired 3 rounds. The group measured half an inch. He adjusted the turrets, fired 3 more. Same hole. Keller stopped talking. The firebase sat on a low ridge overlooking the Quezon Valley, 40 clicks southwest of Da Nang. 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines held the perimeter, sandbags, concertina wire, and a rotating cast of exhausted riflemen who'd been chasing ghosts through the jungle for 3 months. The war here wasn't dramatic. It was patient. The enemy moved at night, set ambushes during the day, and disappeared before gunships could arrive. White Feather had been attached to the firebase for 5 weeks, running counter-sniper operations, taking shots nobody else wanted. He didn't talk much. He just worked. 3 weeks after the Ruger arrived, the radio crackled at 0520. White Feather was already awake, cleaning the rifle by flashlight in his hooch. The voice on the net was tight, controlled, but underneath it, White Feather heard the edge of panic. "Firebase Delta, this is Anvil 2-1. We are pinned. Casualty collection point under enfilade fire. 4 medics down, 6 wounded, cannot move. Request immediate fire support." Grid follows. The operations officer plotted the coordinates. 2 kilometers northwest, low ground near a river bend, heavy jungle. Gunships couldn't get low enough through the canopy without taking ground fire. Artillery risked hitting friendlies. The enemy was too close to the casualty collection point, using the wounded as a shield. "We need someone to silence that tree line," the officer said, looking at the map. "Or we lose everyone." White Feather was already grabbing his gear. He slung the Ruger across his back, checked his ammunition, match-grade .308 handloads, 168-grain Sierra Match Kings, and turned to his spotter, a private named Diaz who'd been with him for 2 weeks. "Let's move," White Feather said. They reached the ridgeline at 0620, moving fast through the pre-dawn dark. Below, the casualty collection point was a small clearing ringed by elephant grass, maybe 60 meters across. White Feather glassed it through his spotting scope. 4 medics in the open, crouched low behind ponchos and rucksacks, trying to stabilize 6 wounded men who couldn't be moved. Every 30 seconds, a rifle shot cracked from the far tree line, 780 meters out, White Feather estimated, and dirt kicked up near the medics. They'd stopped moving. They were pinned. Diaz whispered into the radio, confirming their position. White Feather settled behind the Ruger, deploying the bipod, and began studying the far tree line through the scope. The glass was perfect, crystal clear, no distortion, the kind of optic you'd use to shoot prairie dogs at 1,000 yards. He counted muzzle flashes, tracked wind shifts in the grass, noted the pattern. 1 shot every 45 seconds, disciplined, patient. Then he found it. A shallow spider hole, camouflaged with leaves and branches, barely visible through a narrow gap in the foliage. The enemy sniper was good, choosing his shots carefully, conserving ammunition, waiting. But Whitefeather saw something else. The sniper wasn't shooting to kill the medics, he was shooting to keep them still. "He's baiting them," Whitefeather said quietly. "Waiting for medevac." Diaz looked at him. "You sure?" "I'm sure." Whitefeather adjusted the scope turrets for 780 meters, checked the wind, 2 miles per hour, left to right, and waited. The Ruger felt solid under his hands, the trigger braking at exactly 2 pounds. When the enemy sniper shifted to take his next shot, Whitefeather exhaled halfway and squeezed. The rifle bucked, the firing stopped. For 30 seconds, silence. Then a second rifle opened up, 50 meters left of the first position. "Shit," Diaz hissed. "There's 2 of them." Whitefeather was already reloading. The second enemy sniper fired twice in quick succession. Crack, crack, both rounds kicking up dirt near a medic who was dragging a wounded man toward the tree line. The medic froze. Whitefeather glassed the new position through the scope, trying to locate the muzzle flash, but the jungle canopy was too thick. The shooter was hidden somewhere in a bamboo thicket, using the natural cover to stay invisible. Diaz keyed the radio. "Anvil 2-1. Be advised, 2 enemy snipers working in tandem. Recommend you hold position until we neutralize." The radio crackled back. "Negative. We're running out of time. 1 man's bleeding out." Whitefeather looked through the scope at the casualty collection point. The medics were trying to work, applying tourniquets, starting IVs, keeping airways clear. But every time they moved, the second sniper fired. It was a perfect trap. The first sniper had been the bait, drawing attention to one position, while the second shooter controlled the field. Marine sniper doctrine said, identify, locate, engage, confirm, kill. But Whitefeather didn't have time for confirmation. He didn't even have a clear target. What he had was a Ruger precision that could put rounds exactly where he aimed them, and medics who would die if he waited for the perfect shot. "I'm going to try something," Whitefeather said. "Try what?" "Suppressive precision." Diaz blinked. "That's not a thing." "It is now." Whitefeather identified 3 possible hiding spots where the second sniper might be: a shadowed hollow behind a fallen log, a dense bamboo thicket, and a pile of deadfall branches. He couldn't see the shooter, but he could make the shooter think he was being watched. He fired into the hollow, 1 round precise, smacking into the log with a sharp crack. 5 seconds later, he fired into the bamboo thicket, then the deadfall. 3 shots, 3 different positions, each one placed exactly where a sniper might hide. The message was clear: "I know where you are, and if you shoot again, I'll find you." The second sniper stopped firing. Below, one of the medics, a stocky corpsman named Hayes, looked up at the ridgeline, then at the tree line where the shots had come from. He couldn't see Whitefeather, but he understood what was happening. Slowly, carefully, he began dragging the wounded man again. 10 meters, then 20. The enemy sniper didn't fire. "It's working," Diaz whispered. Whitefeather kept the scope on the tree line, scanning for movement. His job wasn't to kill the sniper. His job was to make the sniper too afraid to kill the medics. It was the opposite of everything he'd been taught. Snipers were supposed to be patient, invisible, waiting for the perfect shot. But perfect shots took time, and time was something the medics didn't have. At 06:34, the enemy sniper gambled. He fired 1 hurried shot at Hayes, who was hauling a litter toward the trees. The round went wide, missing by 2 feet. But Whitefeather saw the muzzle flash, a brief flicker of light in the bamboo thicket, 830 meters out. He adjusted for distance and wind, exhaled, and fired. The enemy rifle tumbled out of the thicket and fell into the open. The jungle went silent. Hayes looked back at the ridgeline again, then kept moving. The other medics followed, dragging wounded men in pairs, working fast. Whitefeather counted. 6 wounded, 4 medics, everyone moving now. They had maybe 3 minutes before the enemy adjusted. Then Diaz said, "We've got movement. Ridgeline, 11 o'clock." Whitefeather swung the scope left. 2 small figures, 950 meters out, standing on a hillside with binoculars. Mortar observers. They were calling in tubes, bracketing the casualty collection point for indirect fire. Whitefeather could see them adjusting their position, taking measurements, radioing corrections. The medics had 8 minutes, maybe less, before the first volley landed. Diaz grabbed the radio to call for counter-battery fire. Whitefeather ignored him and focused on the observers. Shooting at 950 meters with a 308 wasn't ideal. The round would be going subsonic, losing energy, but the Ruger was built for long-range precision. He dialed the turrets for maximum elevation, accounted for wind and bullet drop, and fired. The first observer went down. He chambered another round, adjusted slightly, and fired again. The second observer dropped. The mortar fire never came. By 0650, all 6 wounded men were in the trees, medics triaging them for medevac. Hayes keyed his radio. "Whoever's up on that ridge, thank you." Whitefeather didn't reply. He was counting his ammunition. 11 rounds fired. 0 confirmed kills, except maybe the mortar observers, but he couldn't see well enough to confirm. By doctrine, it was a failure. By reality, 6 men were alive who shouldn't have been. Diaz looked at him. "You know they're going to ask for a body count. Let them ask. What do I tell them?" Whitefeather ejected the magazine, checked the chamber, and began packing the rifle. "Tell them the medics made it out. That's the only count that matters." Captain Marsh didn't understand. He stood in the operations tent at Firebase Delta 3 hours later, looking at Whitefeather's after-action report, and frowned. 11 rounds, no confirmed kills," Marsh said slowly. "You're telling me you spent 11 rounds and didn't eliminate a single hostile?" "The hostiles stopped shooting," Whitefeather said. "The medics got out. Mission accomplished." "That's not how sniper operations work, Corporal. We measure success by enemy attrition. You're supposed to—" "With respect, sir, I'm supposed to support the mission. The mission was getting those medics out alive." Marsh set the report down. He was a good officer, competent by the book, the kind of leader who kept units functioning by following doctrine. But doctrine didn't account for situations like this. Snipers were force multipliers. They killed high-value targets. They disrupted enemy operations through elimination. They didn't suppress enemy fire with precision shots that deliberately missed. "This isn't what we trained you to do," Marsh said finally. "No, sir," Whitefeather agreed. "It's what the situation required." The conversation ended there, but the tension didn't. By evening, word had spread through the firebase. Some of the Marines thought Whitefeather had done something remarkable. Saving 6 men without killing anyone was the kind of story that felt almost mythical. Others thought he'd wasted ammunition and gotten lucky. Keller, the sergeant who'd mocked the Ruger, didn't say anything. He just watched Whitefeather clean the rifle that night, methodical and quiet, and seemed to be reconsidering something. Hayes, the medic, found Whitefeather 2 days later. He was a short, broad-shouldered corpsman from San Diego, the kind of man who moved through chaos with calm efficiency. He sat down next to Whitefeather outside the hooch and didn't say anything for a minute. "You know what I remember most?" Hayes said finally. "The way the dirt stopped kicking up. One second we were pinned, couldn't move without getting shot at. The next second, nothing, just silence. I didn't even hear your shots. I just knew someone was up there making space for us." Whitefeather nodded but didn't respond. "I've been doing this for 8 months, Hayes continued. "Seen a lot of guys try to be heroes. Most of them get people killed. But you didn't try to be a hero. You just solved the problem. It's what the rifle's for," Whitefeather said quietly. Hayes looked at the Ruger, propped against the sandbags. "What's with the name? Still Point?" T.S. Eliot. "There's a poem about finding stillness in the middle of chaos. At the still point of the turning world. The idea that even when everything's moving, there's one fixed center that doesn't change. And the rifle is the still point? The rifle creates it," Whitefeather said. For a few seconds, in a small space, I can make things stop moving. Give people a chance to act. That's all. Hayes was quiet for a moment, then he said, "You saved my life, and 5 others. I don't care what the report says." That night, Diaz asked Whitefeather what he thought the Corps would do with the after-action report. "They'll file it," Whitefeather said. "Forget about it." "What if they don't? What if someone actually reads it?" Whitefeather looked at him. "Then maybe they'll realize that killing isn't always the point. Sometimes the point is making the other guy too scared to kill you. Do you think you'd trust the official methods, or trust what your own hands and eyes tell you works? Comment which side you choose, and share this episode with someone who loves real human stories from history. 3 weeks later, Firebase Delta received a priority message from battalion headquarters. A rifle platoon had been ambushed 6 clicks northeast near a village called Phuoc Ninh and was taking casualties from an enemy machine gun position they couldn't locate. Air support was 20 minutes out. Artillery was danger close. The platoon commander requested immediate sniper support. Whitefeather and Diaz were moving within 5 minutes. They reached the hilltop overlooking Phuoc Ninh at 11:40, low-crawling the last 100 meters to avoid skylining themselves. Below, the Marine platoon was pinned in a dried-out rice paddy, taking fire from somewhere in the village. Whitefeather glassed the area through his scope. The machine gun was well hidden, probably inside a stone house, firing through a window or a prepared loophole. He couldn't see it, but he could hear it. The steady mechanical hammering of a belt-fed weapon chewing through ammunition. Diaz got on the radio and coordinated with the platoon. The machine gun was in a house on the southern edge of the village, but the Marines couldn't pinpoint which one. Every time they tried to maneuver, the gun opened up and drove them back. Whitefeather studied the village for 10 minutes, not looking for the gun itself, but for changes. Patterns in the architecture, places where the wall plaster looked newer, windows that had been bricked up or modified. Then he saw it. One house with a darkened window, the shutters slightly ajar, positioned perfectly to cover the rice paddy. He couldn't see the machine gun, but the geometry made sense. "Target house southeast corner," Diaz relayed to the platoon. "We need confirmation," the platoon commander replied. "Can't call Artie on a guess." Whitefeather made a decision. He fired 1 round into the wall next to the window, not at the machine gun, but at the idea of the machine gun, forcing the crew to react. The machine gun immediately swung toward his position and opened fire, bullets cracking overhead. But in doing so, the crew exposed the barrel through the window. Whitefeather adjusted, fired again, and the machine gun went silent. "Confirmed," the platoon commander said over the radio. "Nice shooting," but Whitefeather wasn't finished. He'd learned something from the casualty collection point. Enemy fighters often worked in pairs or teams with backup positions and coordinated fields of fire. If there was one machine gun, there might be another. He kept scanning the village, looking for the second threat. 2 minutes later, he found it, another prepared position 200 meters west of the first, covering the platoon's likely withdrawal route. This time, he didn't wait for the crew to fire. He put 3 rounds into the position, forcing them to abandon it before they could set up. The platoon began moving, extracting from the rice paddy without further casualties. When Whitefeather and Diaz returned to Firebase Delta that evening, Keller was waiting. The sergeant had been listening to the radio traffic during the engagement. "You're doing it again," Keller said, "shooting at things you can't see." "I can see the geometry," Whitefeather replied. "That's enough. That's not what they taught us at sniper school. Sniper school assumes you have time to wait for a perfect shot. I don't." Keller thought about that. Then he said, "Can you teach me how to do it?" Whitefeather looked at him surprised. Keller was a by-the-book Marine, the kind who followed doctrine because doctrine was safe. Asking to learn an unofficial method was a risk. "It's not complicated," Whitefeather said. "You just have to trust what the rifle tells you. The Ruger doesn't lie. If you dial it right, account for wind and distance, it goes where you point it, every time. No guessing. You shoot at the space where the threat should be, and if you're right, the problem stops. And if you're wrong, then you adjust and try again. But you can't wait for certainty. Certainty takes time, and time gets people killed. Over the next week, Keller started carrying a Ruger Precision of his own, a loaner from the armory, heavier than the M40, but capable of the same half-inch groups Whitefeather was getting. He practiced on the range, learning to trust the rifle's precision, and began running operations with the same approach: shoot to create space, not just to eliminate threats. Captain Marsh noticed. He pulled Whitefeather aside one evening and said, "You're changing how my snipers think about their job. Is that a problem, sir?" Marsh paused. "I don't know yet. The results are good, but this isn't doctrine. If it goes wrong, it's on you." "Understood, sir." "And if it goes right," Whitefeather smiled slightly, "then maybe doctrine changes." The validation came from an unexpected source, a classified after-action analysis conducted by a Marine intelligence officer named Lieutenant Voss, who'd been embedded with the battalion to study sniper effectiveness. Voss wasn't a shooter. He was an analyst, a former grad student in operations research who'd been drafted and assigned to study battlefield data. He spent 3 months collecting engagement reports, ammunition expenditures, casualty rates, and fire mission outcomes. When he compiled the data, he found something nobody expected. Whitefeather's engagements had the lowest kill-per-round ratio of any sniper in the battalion, 1 confirmed kill for every 9 rounds fired. By traditional metrics, he was the least effective shooter in the unit. But when Voss cross-referenced that data with casualty rates for the units Whitefeather supported, he found the opposite pattern. Those units had suffered 40% fewer casualties during engagements where Whitefeather provided overwatch. Voss presented his findings to Captain Marsh in the operations tent, spreading the data sheets across the map table. "I don't understand," Marsh said. "You're telling me he's saving lives by not killing the enemy?" "I'm telling you he's changing enemy behavior," Voss replied. "Traditional sniper doctrine focuses on elimination, killing high-value targets to disrupt enemy operations. But Corporal Whitefeather is using precision fire to create suppression. He's forcing enemy shooters to stay hidden, disrupting their ability to engage effectively. It's not about body count. It's about controlling the battlefield." Marsh looked at the data. The numbers were clear. During Whitefeather's engagements, enemy fire rates dropped by an average of 60%, and friendly casualties decreased proportionally. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't the kind of thing that generated medals or headlines, but it worked. "Why hasn't anyone figured this out before?" Marsh asked. "Because it requires a level of precision most rifles can't deliver," Voss said. "You need to be able to put rounds exactly where you want them, at distance, under pressure. The M40 is a good rifle, but it's not a precision instrument. The Ruger Precision is, and Whitefeather knows how to use it." Marsh was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "If I put this in a report, it'll get buried. Higher command doesn't want to hear that we're measuring success by not killing people." "Then don't put it in a report," Voss said. "Just let him keep doing what he's doing." But the secret was already out. Within 2 weeks, 3 other snipers in the battalion had requested Ruger Precision rifles. Keller was running operations using suppressive precision, and his results mirrored Whitefeather's. The armory started getting requests for match-grade ammunition, better optics, rifles built for competition shooting. It wasn't official doctrine, but it was becoming standard practice. The big twist came in early August, when a Marine colonel from division headquarters visited Firebase Delta to observe Whitefeather's methods firsthand. The colonel, a career infantry officer with 2 tours in Korea, watched Whitefeather run a live engagement, supporting a squad that was clearing a village. Whitefeather fired 14 rounds over the course of an hour, never hitting a confirmed target, but forcing enemy fighters to abandon 3 prepared positions and withdraw without engaging the Marines. Afterward, the colonel sat down with Whitefeather in the mess tent. "I've been doing this for 20 years, the colonel said, "and I've never seen anyone use a rifle the way you do. "It's just geometry, sir," Whitefeather said. "No," the colonel replied. "It's a different way of thinking about what a sniper is for. We've always treated snipers as assassins. You're treating them as, I don't know, defensive players, creating safe space instead of taking lives." "It's not that I don't take lives when I have to," Whitefeather said carefully. "It's that killing isn't always the most effective solution. Sometimes making the enemy too scared to shoot is better than killing one guy and having 3 more take his place." The colonel nodded slowly. Then he asked, "If you could rewrite sniper doctrine, what would you change?" Whitefeather thought about that. "I'd teach precision control instead of precision lethality. I'd emphasize shot discipline over body count. And I'd make sure every sniper understands that their real job isn't killing. It's creating conditions where their unit can operate safely. Sometimes that means taking a life. Sometimes it just means taking a shot that changes how the enemy thinks." The colonel made a note. Then he said, "I'm going to recommend you for a commendation. What you're doing is important." Whitefeather shook his head. "With respect, sir, I'd rather you just let me keep working. Medals draw attention. Attention makes me a target." The colonel smiled. "Fair enough, but this conversation isn't over." 3 days later, the colonel submitted a classified report to Marine Corps headquarters, recommending a formal study of precision suppression techniques and the development of new sniper training protocols. The report was filed, reviewed, and quietly archived. No formal changes were made to doctrine, but the ideas persisted, passed along through informal channels, taught by instructors who'd heard the stories, adopted by snipers who saw the results. Whitefeather rotated out of Vietnam in September, his tour complete. He didn't leave with a chest full of medals or a dramatic departure. He just packed his gear, handed the Ruger Precision back to the armory, and boarded a transport plane to Okinawa. The rifle stayed at Firebase Delta, where it was checked out by other snipers, used in dozens more engagements, and eventually rotated back to the States when the Firebase was abandoned in 1970. But the story didn't end there. 23 years later, in 1994, a Marine gunnery sergeant named Hayes, the same corpsman who'd been saved by Whitefeather's suppressive fire at the casualty collection point, was teaching at the Marine Corps Scout Sniper School in Quantico. By then, Hayes had transitioned from field medicine to training, spending his career trying to pass along the lessons he'd learned in Vietnam. One day, during a lecture on sniper tactics, a student asked him about non-lethal applications of precision fire. "Is it true you can suppress an enemy position without actually killing anyone?" the student asked. Hayes paused. Then he told the story of the casualty collection point, the 2 enemy snipers, the mortar observers, the 11 rounds that saved 6 lives. He described the way Whitefeather had used the Ruger Precision not as a killing tool, but as a control tool, creating pockets of safety in the middle of chaos. "The thing you have to understand," Hayes said, "is that Whitefeather wasn't just a good shot. He was a good thinker. He understood that the mission wasn't about proving he could kill. It was about making sure we didn't die. That's the difference between a sniper and a marksman. A marksman hits what he aims at. A sniper understands what he's aiming for." The lecture was recorded and later became part of the sniper school's training curriculum. The techniques Whitefeather had developed, precision suppression, defensive fire, shot discipline, were formalized into a module on non-lethal fire superiority. The term still point entered the Marine Corps lexicon used to describe the concept of creating fixed zones of safety through precision fire. But the deepest twist came in 2008, when a military historian researching Vietnam-era sniper operations uncovered Lieutenant Voss's classified report from 1968. The report had been filed and forgotten, buried in a warehouse full of after-action documents that nobody had digitized. When the historian read it, he realized it was the first documented case of precision suppression being used systematically in combat. He published an article about it in a military journal, crediting Whitefeather with pioneering a technique that would later be adopted by special operations units worldwide. Whitefeather himself never saw the article. He'd left the Marines in 1972, returned to Montana, and spent the rest of his life working as a hunting guide and firearms instructor. He rarely talked about Vietnam. When people asked him about his service, he'd say he'd been a sniper, nothing special, and change the subject. The only time he ever mentioned the Ruger Precision was during a conversation with a young hunter who asked him what his favorite rifle was. "There was one I used in the war," Whitefeather said. "Called it the Still Point. It wasn't the most powerful rifle or the lightest or the most popular, but it was the most precise. And precision meant I could do things other people couldn't. I could shoot without killing. I could create space instead of taking lives. I could make the enemy so afraid of being seen that they'd rather hide than fight." "Did it work?" the hunter asked. Whitefeather thought about the medics moving through the clearing, the wounded men dragged to safety, the machine gun that went silent, the platoon that made it home. He thought about the 11 rounds fired that day and the 6 lives that continued because of them. "Yeah," he said quietly, "it worked." The final historical twist. In 2015, the Marine Corps officially updated its sniper training manual to include a section on precision fire control and suppressive accuracy. The section opens with a quote, unattributed, that instructors recognize as coming from Whitefeather's conversation with the colonel in 1968. "The real job isn't killing, it's creating conditions where your unit can operate safely. Sometimes that means taking a life. Sometimes it just means taking a shot that changes how the enemy thinks." The Ruger precision rifle itself is long gone, scrapped or lost in the decades after the war, but the idea behind it persists. In armories across the Corps, snipers still talk about finding the still point, that moment when precision creates calm, when one perfect shot makes the difference not by ending a life, but by preserving many. The rifle wasn't named Still Point because it didn't move. It was named Still Point because it created stillness, tiny islands of safety in a war that gave none. And in the end, that was worth more than any confirmed kill. If this story reminded you that sometimes the best solutions come from those willing to break the rules, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story.